The galaxy had always considered humans to be harmless. For 300 years, humanity had been the quiet species that paid its taxes, followed the rules, and never caused any trouble. They were traders and explorers, building small colonies on planets that nobody else wanted. The great empires of the galaxy barely noticed them at all. Ambassador Daniel Carter had spent 20 years working in the Galactic Senate. He was a patient man who believed that words could solve any problem. His young assistant, Lisa Monroe, shared his belief in peaceful solutions. Together, they had helped humanity earn a small but respected place among the stars. But everything changed on a cold morning in the Meridian system. The human colony of Meridian 7 was home to 8 million people. For 50 years, they had worked hard to turn a barren world into a place worth living. They built cities and farms. They raised families and created a future. The Galactic Confederation had declared the system worthless, so nobody bothered the humans who settled there. Then the Zorath Empire discovered something valuable beneath the surface. The Zorath were the most powerful species in the galaxy. They had conquered over 100 civilizations in their 4,000-year history. They had never lost a war, never shown mercy, and never cared about the lives of those weaker than themselves. When they wanted something, they simply took it. Governor Samuel Price received the eviction notice on a Tuesday morning. The Zorath gave his people 30 days to abandon everything they had built. 50 years of work, millions of lives, entire cities filled with homes and schools and hospitals, all of it was to be left behind because the Zorath had decided they wanted the land. Samuel was a stubborn man. He had been born on Meridian 7, and he intended to die there. He sent a message to the Zorath commander, Admiral Vexner, politely requesting more time to negotiate. The Admiral's response came 3 days later in the form of plasma bombs. The first strike hit the capital city of New Providence at exactly 8:15 in the morning. Children were walking to school. Workers were beginning their shifts. Elderly couples were taking their morning walks through the park. None of them had any warning. 40,000 people died in the first 3 minutes. The bombs kept falling for another hour. By the time they stopped, the city was nothing but smoke and ashes. Emergency services could not reach the survivors because the roads had been melted into glass. Hospitals overflowed with the wounded while doctors worked without power or supplies. Daniel Carter watched the footage from his office on the Senate station. His hands shook as he saw the images of burning buildings and screaming children. Lisa stood beside him, tears running down her face. Unable to speak, they demanded justice. They filed emergency motions with the Galactic Senate. They called for an investigation, for sanctions, for anything that might acknowledge the horror of what had happened. The Senate voted 3 days later. 847 representatives voted to dismiss the human complaint. Only 3 voted in favor of investigating the Zorath attack. The reason was simple. Under Confederation law, the Zorath had the right to claim any territory containing strategic resources. The human colony was, legally speaking, trespassing. The destruction of New Providence was therefore classified as a lawful enforcement action. 40,000 dead. 40,000 fathers and mothers and children and grandparents, and the galaxy called it legal. Daniel stood in the center of the Senate chamber after the vote. The massive room stretched upward for hundreds of meters, filled with representatives from 1,000 different species. Most of them were already leaving, bored with the trivial complaints of the insignificant humans. He wanted to scream at them. He wanted to make them understand what they had allowed to happen. But he was a diplomat, trained to control his emotions, so he simply walked out of the chamber without saying a word. That night, he sent his resignation to the Earth government. He packed his belongings, said goodbye to Lisa, and boarded a transport home. He spoke to no reporters and gave no interviews. There was nothing left to say. Lisa stayed behind to handle the transition. She spent the next week answering questions from officials who did not really care about the answers. She watched the news reports that treated the Meridian massacre as a minor story, barely worth mentioning compared to the latest Velthary art exhibition. She was eating alone in the diplomatic quarters when her communication device activated with an emergency broadcast. The seal of the United Earth government filled the screen, followed by the face of President Henry Morrison. "Citizens of Earth and all human territories," he began. His voice was calm, but his eyes were hard. "1 week ago, the Zorith Empire murdered 40,000 innocent people on Meridian 7. They did this knowing that the Galactic Senate would protect them. They did this because they believe we are weak." Lisa put down her food, her full attention on the screen. "For 300 years, humanity has tried to be peaceful. We have traded fairly, followed the rules, and never raised our hand against another species. We believed that civilization meant something. We believed that justice existed." The president paused. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Colder. Harder. "We were wrong. The galaxy has shown us that peace is not given to those who deserve it. Peace is only given to those who can defend it. And so, effective immediately. The United Earth government is withdrawing from the Galactic Confederation." Lisa felt her heart stop. "Furthermore," the president continued, "we are formally declaring a state of war against the Zorith Empire. They have killed our people. They have destroyed our homes. They have laughed at our grief and called it justice. This cannot stand. This will not stand." The broadcast ended. Lisa sat in the silence that followed, trying to understand what she had just heard. Humanity was going to war against the most powerful empire in galactic history. They had 112 ships against 10,000. They had no military tradition, no combat experience, no hope of victory. Across the galaxy, the reaction was exactly what the humans expected. The Zorith found the declaration hilarious. Admiral Dexner reportedly had a copy of the war announcement framed and hung on his wall as a joke. Other species expressed concern for the poor, confused humans who clearly did not understand what they were doing. Nobody took it seriously. Nobody believed that the quiet, peaceful humans could possibly threaten the mighty Zorith Empire. They were prey declaring war on a predator. It was sad, really. Almost tragic, but the galaxy had forgotten something important about humanity. They had forgotten that humans had not always been peaceful. They had forgotten that before the stars. Before the Confederation, before the Age of Exploration, humans had spent 10,000 years fighting each other in wars that had nearly destroyed their entire civilization. They had learned to be peaceful, but they had never forgotten how to be dangerous. And now, for the first time in 3 centuries, humanity was about to remind the galaxy why they should have been afraid all along. "Commander." Nathan Brooks had served in the Earth Defense Fleet for 15 years. In all that time, he had never fired a weapon at another living being. His job had been simple: patrol trade routes, protect cargo ships from pirates, and look professional during diplomatic events. The fleet existed mostly for show, a symbol that humanity took itself seriously, even if nobody else did. But Nathan remembered the stories his grandfather used to tell. Stories about a time before the stars, when humans fought wars against each other, wars with guns and bombs and weapons that could destroy entire cities. Wars where millions died and nations crumbled, and the survivors had to rebuild everything from the ashes. His grandfather had survived one of those wars. He had been a young soldier fighting in a conflict that seemed hopeless. His side had been outnumbered and outgunned, facing an enemy that should have crushed them easily. But they had fought anyway, because giving up was not something humans knew how to do. "We learned to be peaceful," his grandfather always said, "but we never forgot how to fight." That knowledge is still there, buried deep inside us. And someday, the universe might make us remember. That day had finally come. The War Council met in a secure facility deep beneath the mountains of Earth. Every surviving military commander, every tactical expert, every historian who had ever studied warfare was called to participate. Their mission was simple but impossible: find a way to defeat an enemy that had never lost. Admiral Patricia Lane stood before the assembled group. She was 60 years old, with gray hair and a face lined by decades of service. She had never commanded a ship in combat. None of them had. But she had spent her entire career studying military history. And now that knowledge was finally going to be useful. "The Zorith have 10,000 warships," she began. We have 112. Their smallest ship is larger than our largest. Their weapons can destroy planets. Their empire has conquered over 100 species in 4,000 years of continuous expansion. She paused, looking at the grim faces around the room. They are also slow, predictable, and completely unprepared for an enemy that refuses to fight fairly. Captain Maria Vance commanded the carrier Independence, one of humanity's largest vessels. She had spent years studying Zorath tactics, looking for weaknesses that the enemy had forgotten to worry about. What she found had given her hope. The Zorath build their ships for intimidation, Maria explained. They want their enemies to see them coming and surrender before the fighting even starts. Their battles are usually over in minutes because nobody is willing to face them directly. She brought up tactical displays showing Zorath fleet movements over the past century, but their size makes them slow. Their confidence makes them careless. And their 4,000 years of easy victories have made them forget what it means to fight. Someone who refuses to give up. The plan they developed was called Operation Wolfpack. Instead of meeting the Zorath in traditional fleet combat, humanity would fight like the guerrilla warriors of their ancient past. Small groups striking from the shadows, hit-and-run attacks that cause damage without risking everything. Psychological warfare designed to confuse and frustrate an enemy that had never needed to be clever. Nathan Brooks was assigned to lead the first strike force. His squadron consisted of 12 small fighters, each one crewed by volunteers who understood they might not come home. They trained for 3 weeks, practicing maneuvers that no sane pilot would attempt. They learned to fly through debris fields, hide in asteroid shadows, and attack from angles that Zorath sensors were not designed to detect. The first engagement happened in the Helios Corridor, a narrow passage of safe space between 2 dangerous nebulas. It was the fastest route from Zoroth territory to human space, which meant the enemy fleet would have to pass through it. Admiral Dexiner himself commanded the attack force. 50 warships, each one bristling with weapons capable of destroying entire cities. He expected to crush the human rebellion in a single afternoon and return home as a hero. What he found instead was an empty corridor. His sensors showed no enemy ships, no defensive positions, no sign that humanity intended to fight at all. Dexiner ordered his fleet forward, confident that the humans had realized their mistake and fled. Then the mines started exploding. Humanity had spent the previous week filling the corridor with thousands of small explosive devices. Each one was too small to destroy a warship, but powerful enough to damage engines and weapon systems. The Zorath ships began losing power, their formations falling apart as captains tried to navigate through the invisible minefield. From the darkness came the Earth fleet. They did not attack in formation. They did not announce themselves or demand surrender. They came in small groups, each one targeting a specific damaged ship. Nathan led his squadron directly into the heart of the Zoroth formation, flying between the massive warships. Using the enemy vessels as cover against each other, his fighters targeted sensors and communication arrays. They destroyed weapons that were trying to track them. They moved so fast and so unpredictably that the Zoroth gunners could not get a clear shot without risking their own ships. Maria Vance commanded the Independence from the edge of the battle. She watched the tactical display, giving orders, coordinating attacks, making sure every human ship knew exactly where to be and when. It was chaos, but it was controlled chaos. The Zorath had no idea how to respond. Admiral Dexiner screamed orders at his fleet, demanding they destroy the human insects that dared to challenge them. But his ships were damaged and confused. Their communications were disrupted. Their sensors kept giving false readings. And every time they tried to form up for a coordinated attack, another group of human fighters appeared from nowhere and scattered them again. The battle lasted for hours. When it was over, the Zoroth had lost 18 ships. Humanity had lost 3. Admiral Dexiner ordered a retreat. He reported to his superiors that he had encountered unexpected resistance and needed to regroup. He did not mention that his hands had been shaken by the end, or that he had never seen anything like what the humans had done. Across the galaxy, the news spread quickly. The mighty Zoroth Empire, undefeated for 4,000 years, had been beaten by the tiny human fleet. It was not a decisive victory. It was not the end of the war. But it was proof that the impossible was possible. Nathan Brooks returned to the Independence with his squadron. It's -2 pilots who had not survived. He did not celebrate. There was nothing to celebrate. They had won a battle, but the war was just beginning. And he knew that the hardest fighting was still ahead. But as he walked through the corridors of the ship, he saw something in the eyes of his fellow crew members. Something he had never seen before in his 15 years of service. It was hope. Dangerous, desperate, impossible hope. And it was spreading. The Zorath Empire did not accept defeat. They had never needed to learn how. For 4,000 years they had crushed every enemy that dared to stand against them. One lost battle meant nothing. The humans would be destroyed. Their tiny rebellion would be forgotten within a generation. But the Zorath understood something important about war. It was not always about ships and weapons. Sometimes it was about breaking the enemy's will to fight. Sometimes the fastest path to victory ran through the hearts of innocent people. Lieutenant Commander Katie Sullivan learned this lesson on a quiet Tuesday morning. She was reviewing tactical data in her quarters aboard the Independence when the news alert appeared on her screen. A Zorath fleet had attacked the colony world of Haven's Rest. There had been no military targets on the planet. No weapons, no soldiers, no strategic value of any kind. Just farms and small towns, and 300,000 people trying to live peaceful lives. The Zorath had killed them all. Katie stared at the screen, unable to breathe. Haven's Rest was her home. She had grown up there, running through fields of golden wheat, swimming in the clear blue lakes, dreaming of the day she would see the stars. Her parents still lived there. Her 2 younger brothers. Her grandmother, who made the best apple pie in the entire colony, gone. All of them gone. Reduced to numbers in an enemy action report. Captain Maria Vance found her an hour later, sitting alone in the observation deck, staring at the stars. Maria did not say anything at first. She simply sat down beside her officer and waited. "They did this on purpose," Katie finally said. Her voice was hollow, empty of emotion. "They killed 300,000 people. Just to make us hurt." Maria nodded slowly. "Yes, they did." Katie turned to look at her captain. Her eyes were red, but her jaw was set with determination. "Will it work? Will we surrender?" Maria thought about the question carefully. She thought about Earth's history, about all the times humanity had been given every reason to give up. The plagues that killed millions, the wars that destroyed entire nations, the disasters that should have ended their civilization before it ever reached the stars. "No," she said finally, "it will not work. We do not know how to surrender. But winning this war is going to cost us more than we can imagine." The attacks continued over the following weeks. The Zorath targeted colony after colony, choosing worlds with no defenses and no military value. They wanted humanity to feel helpless. They wanted mothers and fathers to look at their children and wonder if their family would be next. President Henry Morrison had not slept more than 3 hours a night since the war began. Every morning he received reports of new attacks, new casualties, new reasons to doubt their decision to fight. His cabinet met constantly, arguing about strategy, resources, the terrible arithmetic of war. Chief Advisor Patricia Lane brought him a proposal called Operation Prometheus. It was the most dangerous plan humanity had ever attempted. It was also their best hope of ending the war before the Zorath destroyed everything they loved. The Zorath homeworld was called the Throne of Conquest. It sat at the center of their empire, protected by 17 massive defense platforms that could destroy entire fleets. No enemy had ever attacked it directly. The very idea was considered impossible. Patricia spread her plans across the president's desk. "We cannot win this war by fighting defensively," she explained. "The Zorath have more ships, more weapons, more everything. Every day this continues, we lose more colonies, more people, more hope." She pointed to the diagrams of the Zorath homeworld. "But they have a weakness. They have never needed to defend their home. Their defense platforms are old, designed to intimidate rather than fight, and their shipyards, where they build their next generation of warships, are completely exposed." President Morrison studied the plans. You want to attack their homeworld. Strike at the heart of their empire. Patricia nodded. Not to conquer it. Just to hurt them. To show them that nowhere is safe. To make them understand that this war will cost them as much as it costs us, Admiral. Grant Patterson was the oldest serving officer in the fleet. He had commanded ships for 40 years, training crews, fighting pirates, watching the galaxy change around him. He had always believed that humanity's peaceful nature was their greatest strength. Now he knew better. I will lead the operation personally, he told the president. My crews have trained for this. We know the risks. And we know that if we do not act soon, there will be nothing left to protect. The plan required perfect timing and impossible luck. A large human fleet would make a very obvious move toward Zorath territory, threatening to attack their supply lines. This would force the enemy to respond, pulling their home defense fleet away from the throne of conquest. While the Zoraths were distracted, a small strike force would slip through the gaps in their defenses. Daniel Carter, the former ambassador who had resigned after the Meridian massacre, volunteered to help with the deception. He would send a false surrender message, making the Zorath believe that humanity was ready to give up. The enemy would be so eager to accept the surrender that they would lower their guard. It was a desperate gamble. If the deception failed, the strike force would be destroyed. If the main fleet was overwhelmed, Earth itself would be defenseless. Everything had to work perfectly, or humanity would lose everything. Nathan Brooks requested command of the strike force. Maria Vance tried to talk him out of it. You are too valuable, she argued. We need experienced commanders to survive and lead future operations. Nathan shook his head. Every operation from now on might be our last. This one matters more than any other. If we succeed, we change the entire war. If we fail, at least we fail trying something that matters. He looked out at the stars, at the vast and terrifying galaxy that had forced humanity to become something they had hoped to leave behind. My grandfather told me stories about our ancestors, he said quietly. About soldiers who walked through fire because giving up was not an option. About nations that refused to die even when the entire world was against them. I used to think those were just stories. Old memories from a violent past we had outgrown. He turned to face Maria. I was wrong. Those stories are who we are. And now it is our turn to show the galaxy what humans do when our backs are against the wall. Maria studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Come back alive, Commander. That is an order. Nathan smiled, though it did not reach his eyes. I will do my best, Captain. But some orders are harder to follow than others. The preparations began immediately. Every ship in the fleet was modified for its specific role. Crews trained around the clock, practicing maneuvers they would only perform once. Engineers worked without sleep to install new systems and repair old damage and across human space. In colonies that had escaped destruction and stations that still held hope, people waited. They did not know the details of what was coming. They only knew that something was about to happen, something that would determine whether humanity survived or joined the countless species the Zorath had already erased from history. The long night was coming, and when it ended, nothing would ever be the same. The deception began with a single transmission that reached every corner of the galaxy. Daniel. Carter appeared on screens across thousands of worlds, his face tired and defeated. He wore the same suit he had worn when he resigned from the Senate, now wrinkled and stained as if he had been wearing it for days. Dark circles under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights. His voice trembled as he spoke. People of the Galactic Confederation, he began, I come before you today with a heavy heart. The human government has collapsed. Our fleets have been scattered, our colonies destroyed. We have no choice but to accept the truth we tried to deny. He paused, swallowing hard as if the next words caused him physical pain. I am authorized by what remains of our leadership to request terms of surrender. We ask only for mercy. We ask only that our people be allowed to live. The broadcast lasted 3 minutes. By the time it ended, the Zorath High Command was already celebrating. Admiral Vexener, recently promoted despite his failure in the Helios Corridor, immediately requested permission to lead the fleet that would accept humanity's surrender. He wanted to be there personally when the upstart species finally admitted defeat. He wanted to see the fear in their eyes as they knelt before Zoroth power. His superiors agreed. Within hours, the majority of the home defense fleet was on its way to Earth, leaving only minimal forces to guard the throne of conquest. Lisa Monroe coordinated the next phase from a secure command center aboard the Independence. She had spent months studying Zoroth's psychology, learning to predict how they would react to specific situations. Every word of Daniel's surrender speech had been carefully chosen to trigger exactly this response. The Zoroth were predators. They could not resist the opportunity to watch their prey submit. Their pride would not allow them to send a smaller fleet when they could send a massive one. Their arrogance would not let them consider that the surrender might be a trick. And so, as the Zoroth raced to witness humanity's humiliation, they left their home nearly undinged. The strike force consisted of 12 ships, each one modified beyond recognition. They carried no heavy weapons, minimal armor, and skeleton crews of volunteers who fully understood they might not return. Commander Nathan Brooks led them from the front, a small fighter at the head of the formation. The route they followed was considered impossible. A stellar nursery filled with young, unstable stars, where radiation levels would kill unprotected. Humans within minutes and gravitational forces could tear ships apart without warning. No Zoroth commander would ever consider sending ships through such a region, but human ships were not designed by Zoroth engineers. They were smaller, more maneuverable, built by a species that had learned to survive in the harshest environments their home planet could offer. Human pilots had trained in conditions the Zoroth considered unsurvivable. Human engineers had built shielding systems that could handle radiation levels that would melt Zoroth alloys. It was still dangerous. It was still potentially fatal. But it was not impossible. Nathan led his squadron through the chaos of the stellar nursery, navigating by instinct as much as instruments. Stars being born surrounded them, vast clouds of gas collapsing into balls of nuclear fire. The radiation alarm screamed constantly. The hull temperature climbed toward dangerous levels, but they kept going. Kilometer by kilometer, hour by hour. They pushed through the fire until finally, impossibly, they emerged on the other side. The throne of conquest lay before them. Nathan had seen images of the Zoroth homeworld, but nothing had prepared him for the reality. The planet was massive, twice the size of Earth, covered in cities that stretched from horizon to horizon. Orbital stations surrounded it like a glittering crown. Ships moved constantly between the surface and space, carrying goods and people and all the business of empire, and they're hanging in high orbit, were the construction yards. 30 vessels sat in their building cradles, each one larger than anything humanity had ever constructed. They were the next generation of Zoroth warships, designed to be faster and more powerful than anything that came before. Once completed, they would make the Zoroth Empire truly unstoppable. They were also completely defenseless. The ships had no crews. Their weapons were not yet installed. Their engines were still being calibrated. They were nothing but empty shells, impressive in size, but helpless in reality. Nathan opened a channel to his squadron. All ships, begin attack run. Priority targets are the construction cradles. We destroy the ships, we destroy their future. The Zoroth defense platforms detected the human ships within seconds. Alarms blared across the planet. Emergency broadcasts interrupted every communication channel. But the platforms were old, designed for a different era, and they were slow to respond. The human fighters were not slow. They dove toward the construction yards at maximum speed, weaving between defensive fire, their pilots pushing their ships beyond every safety limit. The first missiles struck the support structures holding the unfinished warships in place. Explosions blossomed in the darkness of space, silent but devastating. Katie Sullivan was among the pilots. She flew with cold precision, her hands steady on the controls, her mind focused entirely on the mission. She thought of Haven's Rest. She thought of her parents and brothers and grandmother. She thought of 300,000 people who would never see another sunrise. This is for them. she whispered as her missiles found their targets. "This is for everyone you killed." The Zorith finally mounted a response. Defense ships launched from surface bases, racing upward to engage the attackers. But they were too late. The construction yards were already burning. One unfinished. Warship after another exploding as human weapons found their vulnerable spots. On the surface of the Throne of Conquest, billions of Zorath citizens watched in horror. They had never seen their home attacked. They had never imagined it was possible. The sky was filled with fire, and for the first time in 4,000 years, the mighty Zorith Empire knew what it felt like to be afraid. The retreat was costly, for human ships did not make it out. Their pilots knew the risks and had volunteered anyway. They died doing what they believed was right, striking at the heart of an empire that had caused so much suffering. Nathan's ship was among the last to escape. His hull was scarred with weapons fire. His engines were failing. Half his systems were offline, but he was alive and behind him. The Zorith shipyards were nothing but debris. As his ship jumped to safety, he allowed himself one moment to look back at the destruction they had caused. 30 warships, 10 years of construction, billions of credits and resources, all of it gone in less than an hour. He thought about his grandfather's stories, about soldiers who had done impossible things because giving up was never an option, about a species that had learned to survive anything the universe could throw at them. "We are not your prey," he said quietly, knowing no one could hear him. "We never were." The news reached the Zoroth fleet. Before they arrived at Earth. Admiral Vexner received the report in his command chamber and read it 3 times before he could accept what it said. The humans' surrender had been a trick. While he was racing to accept their defeat, they had attacked his home. His home. The Throne of Conquest. The center of Zoroth power for 4,000 years. The fleet turned around immediately. Abandoning the journey to Earth, racing back to defend a homeworld that no longer needed defending, the attack was over. The humans were gone, but the damage remained visible to every citizen of the Empire, and across the galaxy the news spread like wildfire. The humans had done the impossible. They had struck the Zoroth homeworld. They had destroyed the pride of their fleet before it was even finished. The galaxy had laughed when humanity declared war. Nobody was laughing anymore. The Galactic Senate had existed for 12,000 years. In all that time, it had never seen a session like this one. Every seat was filled. Representatives from 1,000 species crowded into the massive chamber. Their attention focused on the central platform where Ambassador Daniel Carter stood alone. Behind him, holographic displays showed images that had shocked the entire galaxy. The burning construction yards above the Throne of Conquest. The scattered remains of the Zoroth fleet that had gone to accept a surrender that never happened. And the current position of humanity's forces, battered but unbroken. Admiral Vexner was notably absent. Reports suggested he had been quietly removed from command, and was facing charges that the Zoroth government preferred not to discuss publicly. His replacement, a diplomat named Vexkul, represented the Empire in this emergency session. Vexkul spoke first, his voice filled with controlled anger. "This unprovoked aggression cannot be tolerated. The Confederation must respond with overwhelming force. The humans have proven themselves to be terrorists, attacking civilian infrastructure and endangering billions of innocent lives." Daniel waited patiently for him to finish, then turned to address the full assembly. His voice was calm, steady, carrying easily through the vast chamber. Unprovoked, he repeated thoughtfully, "An interesting choice of words. Tell me, Representative, what would you call the destruction of Meridian 7? What would you call the murder of 40,000 civilians who had committed no crime except living on land you decided you wanted?" Vexkul started to respond, but Daniel continued without pause. "What would you call the attacks on Haven's Rest? On New Harmony? On Shepherd's Gate? 3 colonies destroyed. Over 500,000 people killed, because your empire wanted to break our spirit. And you call our response unprovoked?" The chamber was silent. Species that had always voted with the Zoroth shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some of them remembered their own histories with the Empire, their own losses, their own reasons to fear. Daniel turned slowly. Making eye contact with representatives from dozens of different worlds, humanity did not seek this war. For 300 years, we tried to be good neighbors. We followed your laws. We paid your taxes. We asked for nothing except to be treated with basic dignity. And when we were denied even that, when our children were murdered and your Senate called it legal, we learned a lesson we had hoped to forget. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made even the largest. Delegates, pay attention. We learn that the galaxy does not reward the peaceful. It does not protect the weak. It only respects those who can fight back. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Well, you have seen what we can do. You know now that we can reach anywhere, strike anything, hurt anyone who hurts us. The question you must ask yourselves is simple. What happens next? The vote that followed was unprecedented. Species who had never voted against the Zoroth suddenly found their courage. The Velthari Council proposed a formal investigation into the Meridian Massacre. The Kryn offered humanitarian aid to displaced human refugees. Smaller powers that had suffered under Zoroth expansion demanded reparations and reforms. For the first time in its 4,000-year history, the Zorath Empire found itself isolated. Vexel tried desperately to salvage the situation. He offered a ceasefire, which Daniel accepted. He offered territorial concessions, which Daniel accepted. He offered financial compensation for Meridian 7, which Daniel accepted. Each offer was more generous than the last, and each was met with the same calm, patient agreement. Finally, frustrated beyond measure, Vexel demanded to know what humanity actually wanted. Daniel considered the question for a long moment. The entire chamber waited in silence. Thousands of eyes watching the human ambassador. "We want the same thing we always wanted," he said finally. "To be left in peace. To raise our children without fear. To explore the stars without asking permission from those who believe might makes right." He straightened, and something in his expression made even the most powerful delegates shift uncomfortably. "But we also want the galaxy too. Understand something important. Humanity has remembered who we are. We are not the peaceful traitors you ignored for 3 centuries. We are the survivors of 10,000 years of warfare. We are the children of soldiers who fought in trenches and deserts and jungles. We nearly destroyed ourselves learning how to fight." He let the words hang in the air. "And now, for the first time in your history, you have met a species that survived its own violent nature. Think very carefully before you give us a reason to show you what that really means." The war officially ended 3 days later. The Zoroth signed a treaty that dismantled their military expansion programs and established human territory as a protected zone. They agreed to pay reparations for Meridian 7 and every other colony they had attacked. The payments would take a century to complete. Nathan Brooks returned to Earth as a hero, though he did not feel like one. He had seen too much death, caused too much destruction, to take any pride in what they had accomplished. When reporters asked him how it felt to have helped defeat the Zoroth, he had no answer for them. Lisa Monroe found him at the memorial service for the fallen pilots. The names of everyone who had died in the war were being read aloud, a list that took hours to complete. Nathan stood among the crowd, listening to each name, remembering the faces behind them. Was it worth it? Lisa asked quietly, standing beside him. Nathan thought about the question for a long time. He thought about the colonies that would never be threatened again, the children who would grow up in peace, the species across the galaxy who were already beginning to challenge their own oppressors. Inspired by humanity's example, "Ask me in 100 years," he finally said. Lisa nodded slowly. She understood what he meant. The war was over, but the consequences would take generations to fully understand. They had won their freedom, but the cost had been terrible. The question of whether it was worth it was not one any of them could answer yet. She looked up at the stars. At the vast and dangerous galaxy that had finally learned to respect humanity, "They will never forget," she said. "What we showed them, what we proved we are capable of, they will remember for 10,000 years." Nathan followed her gaze. Good, he replied. Because we remember too. And maybe if they are wise, they will learn the lesson we did. What lesson is that? He was quiet for a moment before answering that the greatest warriors are the ones who choose peace, because they know better than anyone what war truly costs. Above them, where the stars shone cold and distant, witnesses to a conflict that had changed the galaxy forever. Humanity had declared war, and the universe had learned to listen. But in the end, it was the silence that followed. The peace they had fought so hard to reclaim, that proved to be their greatest victory. The memorial ceremony ended as the sun set over Earth. The crowd slowly dispersed. Returning to homes and families and lives that could finally move forward, Nathan stayed until the very end. His eyes fixed on the names carved into stone. He thought about his grandfather's stories one last time. About soldiers who had walked through fire. About nations that had refused to surrender. About a species that had learned through terrible experience what violence really meant. We chose peace, he whispered to the memorial. To the names of the dead, to the stars above. We chose it once before, and we will choose it again. But we will never forget what we are capable of, and neither will they. The last light faded from the sky. Somewhere in the darkness, humanity was already beginning to rebuild. New colonies would be established. New families would be raised. New generations would grow up knowing that they lived in a galaxy that finally understood what it meant to threaten the children of Earth. The war was over. The peace had begun. And somewhere in the vast emptiness of space, the galaxy turned its attention to other matters, never quite forgetting the quiet species that had proven itself anything but harmless. Humanity had remembered who they were, and the universe would remember it too, for as long as the stars continued to shine.